J Beam, and good evening, everybody. It is such a wonderful thing to be able to share space and to be able to have this powerful, powerful event with amazing Dalit feminists from around South Asia to discuss the urgent issue of caste-based sexual violence. We are just getting started and getting ready to in. So if you can take some time, please get settled because we will be here for the next hour and a half or so, and we'll be beginning shortly. But while we are waiting for folks to begin our process, if you don't mind introducing yourself into the chat, maybe say your name, what organization you're from, and what part of South Asia you are from. We would love to hear more about you and why you felt it was important to join Dalit women who are standing up around the world around caste-based sexual violence. So J Beam, everybody, and we'll get started shortly. Wow, love the hellos and registrations that people are coming in. It's so wonderful to see everybody. I love the folks that are here, not from organizations, but are here because of their commitment to feminism and women's rights. Welcome. You don't need to be in an organization to be part of a movement for dignity. And so we're really, really honored to have you all from all the disciplines and all the places that you might be coming. So thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. It's wonderful to be here with such powerful family. Again, my name is Thenmozhi Soundararajan, and I'm Executive Director of Equality Labs. And it is my honor and privilege to open up this powerful and really thoughtful webinar related to caste-based sexual violence in South Asia. And, as folks are beginning to check in, one thing that we would like to note is that this is a webinar that will be providing interpretation. And so before we go forward into the program itself, if you guys can check on your session, you'll see that there is an option for interpretation at the very bottom of your screen. You'll see it with the globe. And at this time, if you don't mind checking the channel of language that you would like to attend the webinar in. For folks that are English speaking, you can check the button that says EN. For folks that would like Hindi interpretation, select those channels now. So I'll give you guys a second for you to pick the appropriate language, and then we will go forward. So again, let's go ahead and adjust our interpretation. And once you're ready, you can put a thumbs up in your attendee section, or just let us know because we will begin right after that. Okay, looks like folks are doing it. Wonderful. All right, so let's get started. So, the issue of caste-based sexual violence is not new to us within the Dalit. We have been speaking these issues as Dalit feminist issues for decades. And I think one of the tremendous tragedies around caste-based violence is that we are here in this moment asking to build power on this issue because it's not an issue now about people not hearing our stories. It's not an issue about there not being enough data. It is an issue of a lack of political will to protect Dalit women, girls, and children and be able to move forward where there is a radical Dalit Bahujan feminist future where we can live free from violence. We have to really take this conversation into the visionary. We have to listen and center to Dalit women who've been fighting this battle, supporting survivors, and really been in the trenches for years to help us not just understand the problem, but move from identifying the problem to actually, investing in solutions. Because at this point, I don't understand how we're in 2021 and we're seeing headline after headline of another or another Dalit girl or another Dalit child sacrificed to this terrible beast of Brahminical patriarchy. And every single woman leader who will be speaking today, someone in their context who has really felt the fire of the outrage of the injustice being done to our women and our families, and is asking for us to turn as a global society away from this, dominator system that is just destroying our peoples. So the power, I think, and the fury, I think, of Dalit women was really activated multi-organizational campaign against caste-based sexual violence that was really, the brainchild of the National Council for Women Leaders and Dalit Human Rights, who worked very closely with Equality Now and Equality Labs to basically spearhead, another, attack point on this system. And this campaign, which has been running for several months, has done an incredible job, not only at highlighting the extent of the problem through data, but also the brave and courageous Dalit women all across the region that have been really addressing this issue at the grassroots level, both speaking about the cases, but also the innovations that Dalit human rights defenders are leading in the face of unspeakable violence, how they still generate hope. And so it's been an incredible honor to watch this campaign, to be supportive of this campaign. And many of the women that are here have been involved from the ground level in this work and in this campaign. And so I'd like to introduce them for you now, and because we'll be hearing their voices shortly. But first and foremost, we have Manjula Pradeep, again, one of the most senior and amazing and incredible Dalit women leaders has been working in this field for decades. She is the national convener of the National Council of Women Leaders and has been the brainchild of innovation in terms of Dalit Bahujan feminism. And so it's really an honor to be able to invite her here. There's also Meena Verma, who is the executive director of the International Dalit Solidarity Network, who has been flanking Dalit women and the issues, crucial for us in terms of intergovernmental organizing. All of that would be impossible without Meena and IDSN's powerful leadership in this space. We also have Rani, who is a of the Bangladesh Dalit and Excluded rights movement. So many of the issues of Dalit women are not known to the world, and Moni Rani has been one of the incredible figures who's helped to make their stories and issues available to the global platform. And so we really appreciate having you here, Moni, as well as Sona, Khatik, and project coordinator of the Samata Foundation of Nepal, who has been creating media strategies related to telling the stories of Dalit women and Dalit people at the frontiers of violence. We also have Srinivasan, who is the legal advisor of South Asia Equality Now, worked hand in hand using powerful community-based research methodologies to be able to tell the story of this violence through data. And so Divya, I would like to pass it to you because I know that you are going to help open our webinar with some of the crucial insights that have come out of the campaign and its research. So Divya, to you.
Thank you so much, Thenmozhi. I won't take too much time because We have like all our amazing speakers for the panel discussion. I just wanted to sort of set the context in terms of caste-based sexual violence in South Asia. And really, I think why we need to look at this issue from a regional perspective and why we wanted to have this webinar to be a South Asia focused one. So firstly, I think in terms of data, there's really a lack of caste disaggregated data on rape cases from most South Asian countries. It's only really in India where we have, in terms of reported rape cases to the police, data on terms of the number of cases reported by Dalit women and girls. And that is quite concerning, where the data kind of shows that there are almost like 10 Dalit women and girls who are raped every day in India. Though actually this number is quite low, like even if we compare it to the percentage of the Dalit female population in the country, and which kind of shows the problems in reporting also, because actually survey data shows much higher rates of sexual violence against Dalit women and girls even compared to the general population. Now, again, we really have this survey data only for India and Nepal. For the other countries, it's again not disaggregated on the basis of caste. But what we can see from these countries is that when we look at the rates of sexual violence, it's actually the highest against, in India, it's the highest against Adivasi women first, and then against Dalit women. In Nepal, we can see this stat is looking not only at sexual violence, but also physical, sexual, and emotional violence. But the rates of violence are highest against Terai and Madhesi Dalits, then against the Muslim community, which is also a minority community in Nepal. And I think you can see in both these countries, as per the survey data at least, the lowest rates of sexual violence are against groups which are not marginalized based on caste or community, which really shows, I think, how vulnerable marginalized communities are to sexual violence. And another thing that we kind of looked at in our research is not only the data, but also trying to speak to survivors and see the challenges that they face in accessing justice for sexual violence. And we found that a lot of the issues are sort of common across the countries. So, for example, this quote is from a Dalit survivor from Bangladesh, who's basically talking about the fact that the rapists in her case were from an affluent and well-connected community, and how that impacted her in terms of her fear in even reporting the case. So the social pressure that is being put on the survivors, which even stops them from reporting. And I think that really connects so again to this next quote, which is from a rape survivor from India, who's talking about the fact that basically she was working as a wage laborer, and her employer asked her and her husband to steal from somebody else's farm. And when they refused, they were threatened and told that there would be a high price for saying no. And actually, when she was alone at home, her employer came and raped her and threatened to kill her. And I think this really brings out the issue of economic dependence, is that when, a lot of Dalit women are economically dependent on the perpetrator or someone else from their community, it's that much harder to raise their voice or access justice for sexual violence. And that sort of brings us also to this quote, which is from a rape survivor from Nepal, who's talking about how she feels that her caste affects her ability to access the justice system, and the sort of discrimination that she's faced within the system, and the fact that she believes that she might have, been able to put the perpetrator behind bars if it weren't her caste. So, I mean, I just put like a couple of these quotes together, like from what we've spoken as survivors, to kind of show the commonality of issues across South Asia that the survivors of sexual violence are facing. And I think that's why it's really important to look at this issue from a regional perspective, and also to build solidarity with activists within the region. And I think apart from that also, we can learn a lot from each other's countries in terms of the laws and policies which are there to address both sexual violence and caste discrimination. For example, a country like Bangladesh, which basically doesn't have any law that's specifically against caste discrimination or doesn't have an anti-discrimination law, can look to India's example in terms of the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act. And similarly, like an issue that we face across the region is the interference by informal bodies like panchayats in rape cases, and how they try to force survivors to compromise cases of sexual violence. So just last year, Nepal actually passed an ordinance which makes it a punishable offense for anybody to try and force survivors to mediate rape cases, and they actually have a higher penalty if that person is holding a public office or is like a public representative. And I think some activists have found that that was useful in sort of getting the number of compromised cases down, like while the ordinance was in effect. And countries like India, where we obviously see this problem in large numbers, so we could learn from laws in other countries in terms of the steps that we have to take. So yeah, just really, I think that's why it's important for us to have this conversation and see how we can work together to end caste-based sexual violence everywhere. Thank you.
Absolutely, Divya. Like, there's no reason we should be having this terror against our women. And I do think that, some of the things that I really want to lift up for people, because again, I'm looking at our list of folks that are here from all around the world. And, the reality of the violence is not new to us as caste oppressed communities. We have lived with this violence for so long. And to me, what's striking is that, the powerful work of this campaign really was that to translate, our lived experiences into data is the platform that allows us to begin to now create collaborative coalitions across the region. Because, wherever we as Dalit women, our states and policies may be far away. And oftentimes, even when you come with reports, they don't listen to you when you're singular into one country. But the potential of the power that we could build with each other, learning skills and tactics, but also a shared policy, really exciting, particularly with leaders like Moni, Rani, and Sona, and Manjula, who have been trailblazing these issues in each of their regions for many years. And so that was the exact kind of opening that we needed to be able to now go into our conversation. And so I'd like to, ask each of our panelists, and Manjula, if you can kick us off, this first question, which is, I'm wondering, for those who are new to the context of caste-based sexual violence, I'm wondering if you could speak about the issue of how you experience caste-based sexual violence in your country context. So Manjula, would you mind talking a little bit about the context in India?
Thank you, Jabim, everybody, and thanks, Thenmozhi, for asking us a very pertinent and important questions. And I thank Divya for opening up this important debate and discussion, which needs to be discussed deeply and very seriously for us to lead towards transforming lives of our women in India and in South Asia. Thenmozhi, I think what is that I would like to start with saying that how do we see caste as an apartheid, because we always compare caste with the race issue in South Africa. That's how we have termed this terminology as caste apartheid. I just want to give a quote of one of the journalists. Her name is Swati Tyagarajan, where she's saying that caste in India is a gaping, bleeding wound that is never allowed to heal. Generation after generation get stuck in the social hierarchies that they are born into. So this is what is caste system. And as we are representing India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, three of the major countries where we have caste-based discrimination and caste system very much integrated into our own societies, I think it's hard time that we discussed how does it is different for those women who are born into an identity which is not a single identity, but with a multi-dimensional identities, with intersectional identities, and how it impacts our lives. And today, in our webinar, we are talking about sexual violence, which is the most gruesome form of violence, which attacks a woman's body, her soul, and her entire life. Uh, as we see what is reported in the media, that India is what remains the most unsafe country for women in the world, and it says that a woman is raped in India every 20 minutes, right? And as per the NCRB data, the National Crime Records Bureau's data, in 2019, the cases of sexual violence like rape were reported of 32,000. Yeah, 11% were from the Dalit community. That's what the media says through the NCRB data. And we also know that what media reports is also tip of the iceberg. The NCRB data also says that every fourth rape victim in India is a child. So we are talking about child sex abuse. We are also talking about the act which came up in 2012, which is called as POXO Act, and how is it implemented, because it shows that, yeah, we are in a very difficult situation. The same NCRB 2019 report said that 94% of the cases registered under this act, the POXO Act, are pending. Can you believe? And the conviction rate for such cases is just 32% nationally. Now, we as Dalit women, we are more than 100 million in across, I think, South Asia and in India. Sexual violence against Dalit women is on the rise. That's what is the report coming out, right? And it says that the last NCRB report of 2020 says that the number of reported cases dropped by 5% between 2009 and 2019. But for Dalit women, they rose by nearly 160%, 160%, from 1,346 cases to 3,486 cases. And last year's NCRB data says, and we always quote that information, is saying that 10 Dalit women and girls are raped every day in India. But the real numbers would be much higher. And I would say that 99% of sexual assault cases are in India are not reported or underreported. I just want to bring to you about a study which we did in 2006, the year when All India Dalit Mahila Adhikar Manch was founded by us. The study was done for 500 Dalit women in 4 states across India, and about the forms of violence they face. And it shows that 54% were physically assaulted, 46% were sexually harassed, 43% faced domestic violence, 23% had been raped, and 62% had been verbally abused. And I still want you to go back, because when we try to identify cases, and as we were trying to bring those cases through our campaign on and caste-based sexual violence, we couldn't go beyond 1985. That was the first case which was reported in the media. But if you see the report of Human Rights Watch, Broken People, and where it states that lower caste women in particular bear the brunt with little to no access to justice. And in that, it states about an incident in Bihar. As if you know about that incident, where the Ranveer Sena, who was challenging the Dalit communities on the issue of land rights, and where they attacked the Dalits, and they raped the Dalit women and girls. They cut their breasts and also shot in the vulva. So this is the situation. This is the anger which is underlying under the caste system, and it is so threatening, and it is so alarming that many times people don't recognize that sexual violence is just not rape, Thenmozhi. It is beyond rape. It is something which is killing the entire dignity of our women and girls. We as Dalit women and girls, we believe that, do we have the right to live in this country with dignity and self-respect? How do people perceive us? With what lens they see us? Are we objects of desire? Are we there to be used as scapegoats? Are we there to be targeted just because our community is asserting for our rights? And this is something which is, I think, which is the point of consideration for us in this webinar, is how do we justify what's happening in this country? How would somebody say that a case of rape is not about a case of one particular individual or one particular family or a particular community. It is the case and incident for the entire nation. How do we say that Dalit women's rights are human rights? We started with saying that Dalit rights are human rights, but now we have to say Dalit women's rights are human rights. I think this is where I want to touch upon and want to say that India is in a very difficult situation. Our laws are just good on paper. There is no rule of law. And I must say that the assertion and awareness amongst the Dalit women is increasing rapidly. And I think the threat which they are receiving because of their being aware and about the rights and being questioning the injustice is coming back to them. There's a backlash on them, and there is a lot of resistance against their assertion, which also results in sexual violence and rape on them. Yeah, thanks, Thenmozhi.
Thank you so much for that, Manjula. And I'm sure I share everyone in the audience's, deep respect for the work that you've done to hold the line with so many leaders across the country. And I also want to just also recognize there are many survivors who are also watching and listening today and hearing some of the stories, especially the Ranveer Sena and how young our victims are. It may be triggering and it may be bringing up feelings of pain and grief. And I want to just take a moment before we begin our other speakers. I want to just be grounded a little bit and know this is not just an intellectual battle. This is also a conversation about healing and justice and the pursuit of justice as part of that healing. And so it is okay to feel the tears. It is okay to feel the rage. It is okay for us to be embodied as we grapple with this violence, because part of what we're doing is we do not want these names and people and families to just be statistics to the wound of caste apartheid. We want freedom. We want dignity. And Dalit women cannot wait for governments that do not see us as human, because we are human today. And so I think that this is why it's so urgent that we have this conversation, are gentle with ourselves as we experience the emotions related to this terrible violence, and move forward in unity as we keep grappling with the problem and move towards solutions. So thank you, Manjula, for those powerful words. Now, Moni, Rani, we could bring you into the conversation a little bit about the context in Bangladesh, because again, very few people are realizing how difficult the situation is for Bangladeshi leaders and the way that the state might address these issues. And so would love to hear you at this time.
थैंक यू दीदी। आप सबको बांग्लादेश की तरफ से नमस्ते। जे बांग्लादेश में भी जे हमारे लड़की महिला है, हम महिला लोग को लेके जब काम करते हैं तो उस टाइम में बांग्लादेश से बहुत भेदभाव है। तो भेदभाव के लिए हम होटल में बकाओं पर जाके खाने नहीं सकते हैं। इसमें भी बहुत ये दिलचस्पी है। तो और हमारे महिला लोग को तो सब टाइम में तो वायलेंस के शिकार होती है। वायलेंस इतना बेसी है जो अपना समाज में भी है। अब बांग्लादेश में जो लड़की लोग का जो रेप होता है, इसके लिए भी हमारे दलितों महिला लोग के लिए बहुत टाइम में जो हम लोग महिला लोग के लिए काम करते हैं, किंतु जब रेप होता है महिला लोग का तो उस टाइम में हम लोग विचार नहीं पाते हैं तो कहाँ पर जाएंगे, किसके पास जाएंगे। ऐसे भी होता है जो बहुत लड़की मर जाती है। तो इनके लिए हम लोग बहुत हम लोग चेष्टा करते रहते हैं जे अपना अधिकार आपके लिए लड़ाई करना होता है। अपना अधिकार कैसे अदा करना होता है, कैसे अपना कहूँ पर ऐसा है जो हम लोग विचार पाए, कहूँ पर ऐसा विचार नहीं पाते हैं। तो इसके लिए हम लोग बांग्लादेश सरकार है, ये सरकार जब चाहिए वर्तमान सरकार, ये सरकार बहुत काम करे दलित के लिए। थोड़ा से हम बोलिए हाउसिंग हम लोग दलितों का हाउसिंग नहीं है, तो इसके लिए हमारे लिए हाउसिंग बना के दिए हैं और हमारे बच्चा लोग के लिए पढ़ाई लिखाई करने के लिए तो हमारे जो मंग है उनको कुछ कुछ ऐसा साल में जो 6,000 तो 12,000 इस
I
तरह
think
पैसा
it's on your
देती है।
end.
तो ये सरकार जी, तो इसके लिए हम सरकार वर्तमान में जो है ये दलितों के लिए समझ लो बहुत सोचती है, समझ बूझ के कितने काम कर रही है। और हम लोग जब भी इनके पास जे हम लोग को ये चाहिए, हम लोग को ये दरकार है, ये तो हम लोग का मांग बहुत ही पूरा करती है। तो इसके लिए हम लोग बांग्लादेश का सरकार को बहुत धन्यवाद देते हैं। जो इसका आगे जो सरकार था हम लोग कभी उनका पास जाने भी नहीं सके। इनके लिए हम लोग कुछ करने भी नहीं सके। तो ये सरकार का माध्यम में हम लोग बहुत कुछ कर रहे हैं बांग्लादेश में। जो सप्ते में किंतु सरकार हम लोग को बोलती है कि आंदोलन करो, आवाज उठाओ, आवाज नहीं उठाने से हम कभी कुछ नहीं देंगे। तो इसके लिए हमारे हमारे जो आंदोलन है, आवाज है, ये जोरदारी है, हम कर रहे हैं। हम लोग आवाज उठाते हैं और सरकार हमारे जो पार्लियामेंट पे हम आप तो मंजूला दी आप जानते हैं कि इसके आगे हम लोग का पार्लियामेंट पे हम लोग का इशरफुल आलम भाई था जो पार्लियामेंट में हम लोग को बात करता था। तो कोरोना वायरस में गए साल उनका इंतकाल हो गया, जिसके लिए हम लोग अभी भी हम लोग का काम जारी है। हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं पार्लियामेंट में। हम भी अपने लिए वहाँ जे लड़ाई कर रहे हैं, जो कैसे करके हम वहाँ ढूकेंगे, कैसे करके हम जो पार्लियामेंट अपना बात अपने बोलने सकेंगे। इसके लिए भी हम लोग जो हम एमपी पोस्ट में की तो मनोनयन पत्र वहाँ कीने थे। तो कीन के भी हम जो सोचे थे जो हम लोग को सरकार एक बार सुजुग देगी, तो सरकार ने बोला एक बार सुजुग करने से नहीं होगा, बार बार करना होगा। तो इसके लिए भी हम लोग चेष्टा कर रहे हैं जो कैसे हम लोग पार्लियामेंट में ढूक कर अपना बात हम लोग अपने से बोलने सकेंगे। जैसे आप मेरा बात बोलते हैं, हम आपका बात बोलते हैं, तो इस तरह हम लोग नहीं चाह रहे। हम लोग सोचते हैं जो हम खुद कर जाके अपना बात वहाँ जैसे बोलने सके। तो इसी के लिए हम लोग जो बांग्लादेश में जो गांव पर हमारे जो हम लोग का जो बहन है, माँ है, बहन है, वहाँ पर बहुत कष्ट है। शहर में सिटी में तो बेसी नहीं है, किंतु शहर में बहुत कष्ट है लड़की लोग का। और ये कोरोना वायरस के चलते जे बहुत ही जो दलितों का नौकरी चला गया है। जो घर पर बैठ के जिन लोग व्यवसाय करते थे, छोटे छोटे व्यवसाय करके खाते थे, रोज आते थे लेके आते थे, रोज खाते थे, किंतु उनका भी कितनी नौकरी नहीं है। तो इसी के लिए बहुत कष्ट में है बांग्लादेश में भी हम लोग। तो सबसे पहले हम लोग जे एक संग बैठ के जे हम लोग ये आईडीएसएन का मेंबर होकर भी हम लोग सब टाइम जाकर वहाँ मीटिंग करने सकते थे, किंतु अभी तो हम लोग कहीं भी जाने नहीं सके। तो इसके लिए हम लोग सब बहनों मिल के जो हम लोग एक संग होके जो अपना अपना देश का बात जैसे हम लोग यहाँ बोल रहे हैं, जैसे नेपाल है, बांग्लादेश है, इंडिया है, सब कोई मिल के हम लोग अपना प्रस्ताव यहाँ रख रहे हैं। तो हम लोग सोचते जो हम लोग सब मिल के जो सब बहन मिल के जो काम करेंगे तो हम लोग का काम करने के लिए समझ बहुत इजी हो जाएगा। तो इनके लिए हम लोग सोच रहे जो हम लोग का जो गांव के जो बहन है, इनको हम लोग कैसे करके इन लोग को निकालेंगे, इनका इनका अधिकार कैसे पाएगी। और घर में बैठ करके लड़का बच्चा जो उसका जो बेटा है, बेटी है, इन लोगों को पढ़ाने का खर्च है, बहुत टाइम में जो बहुत पैसा लगता है। ऐसा ऐसा रोग हो जाता है जो पैसा के लिए उसका इलाज नहीं कराने सकते हैं। तो हम लोग भी सोचते जो हमारे जितना बहनें हैं सब जैसे अपने पैरों पे खड़े हो सके और खड़े होके जैसे समाज में एवं अपना घर पर और राष्ट्रों में अपना बात बोलने का लिए साहस रहना जरूरी है। आज तो हम साहस ही नहीं रखेंगे तो किस तरह के हम लोग कैसे बात करेंगे। तो इसी के हम लोग बांग्लादेश में भी काम कर रहे हैं, काम जारी है। आप लोग का संग भी है, तो आप लोग हम लोग का संग में रहोगे तो हम लोग सब सोचेंगे जे हम सब में सोचेंगे हमारे साथ 10 बहनों हैं, तो इसी के हम लोग सब जैसे एक संग हो के सब टाइम में जैसे हम लोग इसी तरह काम करें तो हम लोग का समस्या का समाधान हाल हम लोग निकालने सकेंगे। तो इसीलिए यही बोल के हम बांग्लादेश की तरफ से आप सबको धन्यवाद दे रहे और मीना वर्मा दीदी का बहुत दिन बाद मुलाकात हुआ, उनको भी हम देखा। तो दीदी को भी नमस्ते, जो लंदन में देखा हुआ था 2010 में उसका बाद में और मीना वर्मा के संग में भी देखा ना मुलाकात नहीं हुआ। तो इसके लिए दीदी आपको बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद, जो आपसे भी मुलाकात हुआ, मंजुला दी आपसे भी। तो सब टाइम में जो हम लोग सोचते हैं जो हम लोग सब एक संग रहेंगे, हम लोग का साहस बढ़ेगा, बात करने का जो शक्ति है ये शक्ति भी बढ़ेगा, आवाज उठाएंगे, लड़ाई करेंगे, काम करेंगे, सबको हम सब एक संग रहने मांगते हैं। जय भीम।
Jai Bhim, Moni Rani. It's such a pleasure to hear your. It's such a pleasure to hear your thoughts and your power. And I think that what's so important about what Moni Rani just shared about the work that her organization is doing in Bangladesh is another critical plank I think that Dalit women are really looking at, which is, when we're looking at the problem of caste-based sexual violence, it is a symptom of the larger cancer of caste, as Manjula spoke about. And I think that what's so important that, in a public health model, you often hear this model of the river, where, you're seeing a river that's flowing and all of a sudden you see all these people that are drowning. And so you want to pull people out of the drowning river because it's like, see, people cannot drown. And so many of our Dalit women and girls and children are those drowning women because we are seeing them drown, sacrifice to this. But at a certain point, our institutions are overwhelmed from only doing triage. We have to be able to start to look upstream in the river in terms of what are the conditions that are causing caste-based sexual violence, specific to the way that caste apartheid operates in our context. And what I heard from Moni Rani's context is that this is one of the reasons why that in addition to supporting survivors, they're focusing on developing the autonomy of Dalit women, whether that's through housing or livelihood. Even in a time of COVID, we are seeing Dalit women be resilient for their families, trying to lift their communities out of the poverty and the conditions of caste that is this web that ensnares us into unending violence. So many people that want to work on this issue, you cannot just come as a dead body. When there is a girl that has been attacked, you need to be there to invest in Dalit women and Dalit communities as we try to pull ourselves to create transitional economic structures that move our communities away from the casted context that currently exists. So I really appreciate, Moni Rani, your examples and how you were saying it was so critical for us to think upstream, apply systems thinking to this problem, because in the end, we have to be able to provide a future for our people because our governments are not currently doing that. And so those experiments that you're doing in your organization and in Bangladesh are really critical for us to think about. Sona, I would love to bring you into the conversation. I know that you are calling in from Nepal and have worked extensively on this issue in terms of Dalit communities. I'm wondering if you can talk about caste-based sexual violence in the Nepali context. Over to you, Sona. Oh, go ahead and unmute yourself. I think you're muted. So.
Thank you, Thenmozhi ji. नमस्ते सभी को शुभ संध्या। जब मैं 7 साल की थी उस समय में हम पहली बार सेक्सुअल एब्यूज का पीड़ा सही हूँ और 3-4 साल तक होते रहा। मैंने इस विषय पर कभी नहीं बात कर पाई और महिलाओं के जैसे जब मैं बड़ी हुई तो यौन हिंसा कितनी बार हुआ, और संयुक्त राष्ट्र के अनुसार 1/3 महिलाएं यौन हिंसा की शिकार हैं। लेकिन और सीमांकित महिलाओं के जैसे नेपाल में दलित महिलाओं पर यौन हिंसा ज्यादा होता है। नेपाल के कर्णाली प्रदेश में वहां के पुलिस रिपोर्ट के मुताबिक कुल बलात्कार की घटना में से 70% दलित महिलाओं के साथ बलात्कार हुआ है। इस तरह कुछ व्यक्तियों निकालने की कोशिश तो किए हैं, लेकिन पूरा यकीन करने लायक नहीं है। और राष्ट्र स्तर पे ही यदि कहें तो हमारे दलित महिलाओं के हक में, दलित महिलाओं के केस में अलग अलग कोई आंकड़ा नहीं है। जब मैं दलित महिलाओं के साथी लोग से बात करती हूँ तो अधिकांश ऊपर यौन हिंसा हुआ है। आंकड़ा न होने की वजह से हमें बहस करने में भी बहुत दिक्कत होता है। इस कोविड महामारी के दौरान में भी बलात्कार की कई घटनाएं हो चुकी है और उन लोगों का हत्या भी हुई है। इनमें ज्यादातर
So it looked like Sona froze for me. Did she freeze for other people?
दलित महिला ही हैं, जैसे कि अंगिरा पासी, सदा, निर्मला बिका महिला है और फिर उनकी हत्या कर दी गई है। हालांकि पूरे नेपाल में कितना दलित महिलाएं के साथ यौन हिंसा, बलात्कार के बाद में उनकी हत्या हुई है, इस बारे में खुद राज्य के पास ही कोई आंकड़ा नहीं पाया मैंने, और ना तो है। यदि ये आंकड़ा लेने में चाहे तो भी बहुत दिक्कत है, कठिन है। कितने लोग का तो न नाम है न उनका फाइल है पुलिस के साथ। दलित महिलाओं पर का यौन हिंसा और बलात्कार के कारण महिलाओं की हत्याओं की संख्या बढ़ रही है। अपराध करने वाले लोग कानून से क्यों डरें? जब मंत्री, जज, वकील, थानेदार, पत्रकार, पुलिस, नारीवाद नेताओं सारे सब उनके ही हैं, तो हमारा कौन है? मैंने आज तक इस बारे में क्यों नहीं बात कर पाई? क्योंकि इस विषय पर बोलने से कुछ नहीं होने वाला है और ना तो कुछ हुआ है अभी तक। लेकिन कब तक चुप रहें? बस अब मैं भी इस मामले में ही बोलने लगी हूँ, और बाकी इस सवाल में इतने ही, बाकी सवाल में फिर मैं बोलूंगी। धन्यवाद तेनमोजी जी।
Thank you, Sona. And I think this actually speaks to such a painful reality, is that, again, despite us holding the bodies, despite us being survivors of sexual violence, the reality is that so much of advocacy, because there's not data. And I always think that's such a poignant thing, because it's like, how much violence do we have to endure before people understand our stories, until we put it into numbers that look official and fancy reports, is not the wounds and the suffering enough, So I really have deep empathy for what you're speaking to in terms of that data gap, and also want to thank you for sharing your story of survivorship, because again, many of the people on this call are survivors also, and we are here because we want to put an end to this violence. And despite how prevalent this violence is in our community, I mean, 2 out of 3 Dalit women talk about being survivors of some form of gender-based violence. It is very rare that Dalit leaders are open about their own survivorship, because of how much taboo and shame is surrounded around these crimes. But I think one thing which is really important that you really shared for us is that, the shame of these crimes is not on us, it is on the harm doers. It is on the system and that fail Dalit women and girls and our human rights. And so, and really thank you for the context in Nepal and how Dalit women are really mobilizing to address the data gap and really also take on the that they're seeing in terms of these crimes. And is to talk a little bit about how impunity operates in your context, because again, I think one of the things that we've seen that very across all Dalit women and their struggles around caste-based sexual violence is that you are first victimized by your harm doer and then next by the system, and that there are so many tactics that help, support the harm doer as opposed to you in terms of the culture of impunity and lawlessness that exists around these crimes, whether it's the lack of, complicity of the police, medical doctors that are working with the harm doers, and even structural failings of reporting, the amount of crimes that exist at a district or state. So Manjula, I'm wondering if you could lead us off to talk about this question of impunity in the Indian context, and then we'll be going to all of our speakers. So Manjula, to you.
I think state impunity is something which is bothering all of us who are in the human rights field, and specifically on sexual violence. As you know that after the Atrocity Act came up in India in 1989, before that, I would say that hardly there were cases which were reported of sexual violence against Dalit women and girls in India, because there was no provision in that sense and no protection for the Dalit communities, apart from the Indian Penal Code, which mentions Section 375 and 376. But that does not solve the problem for Dalit women. And when we're talking about state impunity, we should not forget that we also have an inhuman practice in India, which is also called as Devadasi, that is temple prostitution, forced temple prostitution, where our Dalit girls are forced to become temple prostitute at the age of 9 or 10 when they're in puberty. Now that is also state impunity, because those cases of rape which happens like every day or several times in a day of a Dalit girl is never reported in the police station, in the name of culture, in the name of religion, right? So on one side is that aspect. On the other side, the reported cases of and unreported cases, as I said, that 99% cases are not even reported. Now let me tell you very frankly, like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Rajasthan, these are the three states, and now I think Madhya Pradesh itself, where we have the highest number of sexual violence cases reported against Dalit women and girls. Now in these states, nobody monitors the state responsibility, the state accountability towards the implementation of the law, and also ensuring that the cases of sexual violence reported and unreported needs to be looked at. I work with the grassroots activists, and these young girls are sharing with me that there are so many cases where they find a dead body without any clothes of a Dalit girl who is found missing one night, and next day they find a dead body, and it's not reported by the police. They don't want to file an FIR. Now, if you don't file the FIR, how will you go for postmortem to identify whether she was raped or gang raped, right? and and let me tell you, like, we have this Criminal Procedure Amendment Act which came up in 2013, and we also had this practice of a two finger test, where the after the rape survivor goes to for medical examination, they insert the fingers in her vagina. Now this is something which is again inhuman. It's a rape, and it's still happening. Now what is the state responsibility? Now we are talking about impunity, but this is also a kind of impunity. Like, you are raping a girl or a woman who has been suffering from the trauma of a rape, which, and the intensity and the seriousness of the nature of crime which was committed on her. And I think the entire question of registration of FIR is the entire question which we all have been struggling, and the lack of awareness amongst the Dalit community is still an issue about the law. Still, people don't know that the Atrocity Act has been amended in 2015, and so even the police doesn't invoke the proper sections as per the Atrocity Act of 2015, the amended act. So these are the challenges which we are facing against the system. And as Moni Rani ji was talking about COVID, and COVID also, where was COVID when we're talking about sexual violence against Dalit women and girls? Hathras incident happened during the COVID pandemic, right? The first year of COVID pandemic, 2020. So this is what we talk about, state impunity, where you burn the dead body of the girl, right? What happened in Delhi also, that the accused, they raped her and burnt her body to destroy the evidence. Now so the point is, what is the role of the police? I think it starts from there. then the entire criminal justice system. What is the role of the judiciary? Why don't we have adequate public prosecutors as women? Why don't we have that? Why we still the male public prosecutors, where these girls, they don't feel safe, the women don't feel safe to speak out what had happened to them. And we talk about in camera trial, and the accused lawyers, the defense lawyers, how do they treat our girls? How do they accuse them and telling them that they are bad character women, and they are accusing and creating a false image of the accused just because of their lowest caste status. And so I think this is all what it shows about. And they are saying that our girls and women register complaints of sexual violence to get compensation. There was a big article in Outlook long time back. It was for Madhya Pradesh, and they were saying that most majority of the Dalit women girls report cases of sexual violence because they want to get money, they want to get compensation. So this is the mindset of our state. This is the mindset of our administration. This is the mindset of the police and the criminal justice system. So how do we deal with that? Where do we get access to justice when we are talking about justice, which is there in the constitution? How do we build up that allyship? And where does the state play the role? Is the state ready to listen to us? The recommendation which we have submitted, have they gone through the recommendation? None of them have reported or replied to one of our mails where we have submitted a recommendation. The media has covered it so nicely, but the state has not even any single state. We have covered 15 states. None of the state has replied to us, to our emails. What does that show? It shows state impunity. It shows state's insensitivity towards our women and girls. They don't see us as human beings, Thenmozhi. And this is, I'm ashamed of saying that I'm part of this country, because I feel that the rule of law, which has to be ensured, and because of Dr. Ambedkar, we are talking about rule of law and constitution and the rights and the laws which are there for the protection of Dalits and Dalit women and girls. And we are ashamed to say that we still have a lawlessness, and the state impunity is increasing day by day. It's not so it shows on the conviction rate. Thank you.
And everything that Manjula is sharing is the textbook definition of impunity, where every stage a Dalit woman is raising issues, you see the case diluted from the registration of the complaint, the filing of the charge sheet, to prosecutorial bias, to the interference of stakeholders like doctors and lawyers. It is wrong. It is wrong. And in this context, it really elucidates how this is the ultimate perpetrator, because it is allowing the diversion of the rule of law. So I really appreciate so much, Manjula, for you to share those thoughts and the tragedy of what is happening to our rights as Dalit women in the Indian context. I'm wondering now if I could bring in Moni Rani to talk about impunity in the Bangladeshi context. Because I think, much of what Manjula is speaking is that there are many laws in India fought both by Dr. Ambedkar and the revisions he made in our constitution for women's rights, but also by other caste oppressed survivors like Bavri Devi and Mathura, which led to our, laws related to rape and sexual harassment in the work. But I think few people are familiar with the legal context in Bangladesh. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how does impunity factor in terms of the conditions that create caste-based sexual violence for Dalit women? Because I think people are very curious to hear from your context. Moni Rani, to you. Oh, Moni Rani, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear the question, Moni Rani?
Yeah.
Oh, I was asking the question about impunity in the Bangladeshi context, because again, in the Indian context, we have a lot of laws, both against caste atrocity and around the rights of women with relationship to sexual violence. How does impunity and state impunity work in the conditions that create caste-based sexual violence in Bangladesh?
मंजुला दी हिंदी में बोलिए तो। मंजुला दी आप सुन रहे हैं?
We have our interpreters there. Are they there?
उनका प्रश्न क्या है?
वो कह रहे हैं कि आपके देश में आपकी सरकार की क्या मानसिकता है जब यौनिक हिंसा होती है, तो किस तरह की आपको चुनौतियां आती हैं? आपको क्या लगता है कि आपके देश में जो दलित महिलाएं और लड़कियां हैं, क्या उनको पूरी तरह से मदद मिल रही है, सरकार का सहयोग मिल रहा है जब उनके साथ बलात्कार की घटनाएं होती है? आपके क्या अनुभव है वो आप बताइए। जी।
पूरी तरह की तो मदद नहीं मिलती है। तो सरकार, जब सरकार सुनती है जे दलितों महिला लोग को ऊपर जे अत्याचार हो रहा है, तो उस टाइम में जो जो अत्याचार करता है उनको पकड़ने के लिए बहुत कोशिश करती है। तो बहुत टाइम में होता है जो जो लोग अत्याचार करते हैं तो उन लोग तो रहते नहीं है, ये गांव से वो गांव से कहीं ना कहीं चले जाते हैं। तो इसी तरह जो हम लोग सुनते हैं तो हम लोग इस तरह आवाज उठाते हैं। आवाज उठाने तो मीडिया लिखने की करते हैं, उस टाइम में पेपर में देते हैं, टीवी में दिखाते हैं। तो उस टाइम में सरकार सोचती है जे नहीं, इनके लिए तो कुछ करना होगा, तो उस टाइम में सरकार कुछ करती है, तो उन लोगों को पकड़ कर शास्ति देती है।
I apologize to the audience. It looks like our English channel went down. I'm just wondering if someone might be able to do a quick consecutive translation of what Moni Rani said for all of our English. Yes, please continue, Moni Rani. Go ahead.
Maybe she doesn't want to say more now.
Oh, got it. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that when she was interpreting, okay, no problem. So, Sona, I'm wondering if we could ask you to speak to this issue of impunity, and also what laws exist in the Nepali context related to sexual violence and caste atrocity, and how you're seeing, that contribute to the conditions of caste-based sexual violence. Sona, were you able to hear the question?
या
Okay, go ahead.
इस सवाल में मैं क्या कहना चाहती हूँ कि एक केस से मैं बात करना चाहती हूँ। 2020 के मई महीने में 23 तारीख के दिन एक 13 साल की दलित बालिका अंगिरा पासी को बलात्कार के बाद पेड़ पर लटकाई गई मिली। उनके केस में क्या हुआ? 25 साल का गैर दलित वीरेंद्र ने अंगिरा को बलात्कार किया। बाद में स्थानीय सरकार का प्रतिनिधि ने उनको जबरदस्ती बलात्कारी के साथ शादी करवा दिया। अंगिरा दलित होने की वजह से ही बलात्कारी का परिवार को समस्या हुआ और उनका हत्या कर दिए। 1 साल से ज्यादा का समय हो गया है, लेकिन इस मामले में कुछ होश हासिल नहीं हुआ है। वीरेंद्र की मां और चाची को कुछ महीने कस्टडी में रखकर पुलिस ने छोड़ दिया। तब से ही
Sona, can you hold on 1 second? Give me 1 second, Sona. We're having some issues with the interpretation because is it on the English channel? We're not hearing the English interpretation. We're hearing double voices. So I just want to make sure that if you haven't done already, you can, if you are on an English channel for Sona's interpretation, click mute original audio and see if that addresses the issue, because I just got pinged about that. Okay, Sona, go ahead, and we'll just, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make sure interpretation was fixed. Go ahead.
ओके, थैंक यू। आज 1 साल से ज्यादा का समय हो गया है, लेकिन इस अंगिरा के मामले में कुछ ठोस हासिल नहीं हुआ है। वीरेंद्र के माँ और चाची को कुछ महीने कस्टडी में रखकर पुलिस ने छोड़ दिया। तब से ही अंगिरा की माँ शांति देवी पासी को गांव में रहने नहीं दिए वो लोग। अब वो गांव से बाहर एक घर बना के रहती है। उनके मामले में राज्य ने ही शादी का बहाना बनाकर दोबारा रेप की इजाजत दिया था, क्योंकि जब मैंने वार्ड अध्यक्ष अमर बहादुर थारू चौधरी से बात की थी तो उन्होंने कहा कि नेपाल का कानून नहीं चलेगा, ग्राम में समाज का कानून चलेगा, और वही किया। ठीक उसी दिन रुकुम पश्चिम नेपाल के रुकुम पश्चिम जिले में 6 लोगों की हत्या की गई थी। दूसरी जाति की प्रेमिका से शादी करने जा रहे एक दलित किशोर और उनकी 5 दोस्त की हत्या कर दी गई। मीडिया रिपोर्ट्स के मुताबिक इनके मामले में भी निर्वाचित स्थानीय सरकार नहीं, स्थानीय सरकार के प्रतिनिधियों पर आरोप है। ये भी यहाँ भी सामाजिक कानून नेपाल का संविधान और कानून से बड़ा ठहरा है। पत्रकारिता के दौरान में मैं अपने गृह जिला कपिलवस्तु में भी एक केस की अनुसंधान की थी। उस केस में 14 वर्ष की एक इंद्रमती धोबी की बलात्कार के बाद दी गई जाहिरी वो हमारे पास है, लेकिन थाने में मिला पत्र की गई वो फाइल अभी तक नहीं मिला। एक बलात्कार के असर से उनकी माँ सड़क पर पागल की तरह चल रही थी। दूसरी बेटी फांसी पर लटकी मिली। थाने में दूसरी बेटी का फाइल तो मिली, लेकिन वो फाइल बंद था। जिस देश में क्या, कितना, किस तरह का केस का डेटा नहीं है, फाइल गायब है, वह बंद है, उस देश का न्याय कैसा होगा? आप यकीन कीजिए या तो आजमा कर देखिए। अगर न्याय देने की सरकार का इरादा है तो सबसे पहले इन मामलों में सरकार दलित महिलाओं का केस का आंकड़े सार्वजनिक करे और उसी तरह ईमानदारी के साथ न्याय दे। मैं पत्रकारिता मार्फत ही कुछ कर सकती हूँ कहकर मैंने बहुत कोशिश की, लेकिन सिर्फ पत्रकारिता से आवाज आगे तक नहीं बढ़ा पाई। नेपाल में कुल पत्रकार में दलित महिला पत्रकार 1% से कम है। सिर्फ इतने लोग से नहीं होगा। न्याय देने वाले जगह पे हमारे लोग अर्थात दलित लोग एकदम कम हैं। सरकार का यही रवैया देखकर और पत्रकारिता के भर पे न्याय ना होने की वजह से मैं भी अब लॉ पढ़ाई कर रही हूँ, और मुझे उम्मीद है मैं मेरी इस पढ़ाई से दलित महिलाओं को न्याय दिलाने में मदद करूंगी। धन्यवाद।
And Sona, I think, again, I wanted to apologize to you, Sona, because we were having some technical difficulties while you were speaking. But I want to just emphasize for people your powerful journey is to go from experiencing this violence and to then share these terrible cases that you've been able to support. I think, everyone is haunted by that image of the young woman you shared who was hung from a tree, who is still pending for justice. And the other terrible cases that you shared, we see the courage of your leaders and the work that you've been doing in the field, and now your turn towards becoming a lawyer is such a powerful journey. Because again, this shows upstream thinking, where you have seen so many of these cases that now you're like, we need to go then become a lawyer. And I'm sure I speak for many people, like one of the first Dalit women lawyers that we met that inspired many of us is Manjula Pradeep, you know, and I think that that is such a powerful journey for us to be able to see the pathway for when the law does not serve us, for our people to become the custodians of the law, for our people to create our constitutions and other possibilities of the state. You know, that's really where we start to see vision happening. And, you know, I think a lot of times, you know, for people who aren't in our region, people often wonder why, you know, Dalits are very obsessed with Dr. Ambedkar and him being the architect of the Constitution. And I think what people forget is that, you know, the significance of him being at the Constituent Assembly and for him to be the architect of that document, it actually marks a departure of centuries of Brahminical laws that, you know, the Constitution really represents the first time in South Asian history that we had a Dalit at the table of governance to issue forth what the constitution of a secular path for our region could look like. And the work that he did, the thinking that he did around the Constitution, took into account the rights of minorities and the rights of women. Because of his time when he was in America, he saw what would happen in another failed, you know, in another colony in the United States, of when you create laws that don't take into account impunity towards religious minorities and women. So because we have that blueprint, the constitutional work that Dr. Ambedkar did went into the constitutions of many regional democracies, whether it's in Pakistan or in Bangladesh or in Nepal. We have the seeds of the Dalit quest for justice and the law in all of our possible contexts. And I think it, you know, what I'm hearing from Sona's, you know, testimony here is that, you know, while our democracies have not really met their responsibilities towards Dalit women are not waiting. Dalit women are going to create the futures, possibilities of freedom and human rights, even if we have to become the lawyers and the policy advocates, researchers that talk about the terrain of injustice in order for us to pursue our vision of freedom. So, Sona, I really, really appreciate so much of what you shared, and I apologize for some of the technical difficulties, and we'll make sure that your full remarks are available in an article afterwards so that people can really hear directly your responses. So I'd like to go now to our final question, which is to ask people about hope. A lot of times when we talk about caste-based sexual violence, because the violence is so debilitating, and I think, Manjula, you said it, like these are crimes really meant to diminish the dignity of a community and to, you know, completely annihilate our possibilities towards freedom. And yet I think that, no, you speak to any Dalit woman, that option is not a possibility. We have to be strong for our family, for each other, for the next generation. And I think it's very important to know that despite this you know, very, very disgusting and, a commitment to death that this violence really recommends, Dalit women are choosing life, and they're choosing possibility, and they're choosing hope and the visionary. And so I'm just wondering, lead us off into our last round of questions about how do you see Dalit women leading visionary solutions in their Dalit feminist practice, and and so I'm wondering if you could talk about how you're seeing hopeful things from Dalit women in the Indian context, and then I'll ask that question for each of our speakers. So Manjula.
Thanks, Thenmozhi. I think wrapping up our webinar with this.
You're muted right now, Manjula.
No, I'm not muted. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, say something.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think the first question is so important for us because it makes us think, where should we go now? Where should we move? And I think that Dalit women have come a long way. from pain to power, from oppression to assertion, right? So in that way, I would say that, yeah, we all had led a journey of our personal lives where we were also at one time victims, and we survived the violence, which even Sona was saying. I can relate it with myself also. But the point is how do we organize and educate and agitate. That's what Dr. Ambedkar gave us, and this is what it makes us strong and powerful, is how we become ally of each other, and we move over that, we cross the transnational boundaries, and we don't see us as only Indians and only Nepali or Bangladeshi or Pakistani or Sri Lankan, because we all are impacted by the structural inequality of caste, and which is resulting into a gruesome kind of violations of a right, which is sexual violence. So sexual violence and assertion of Dalit women goes together, because and we as activists, I think there were times that we were very few, and now in 20s, and now I think we have so many young women from the community who are becoming lawyers, as you said, Senmori, as activists. And I think the best part is that they have the spark and they have that energy, and they want to do something, they want to question the injustice. And what is lacking is that the solidarity which they should gain from the Dalit rights movement's man, and also by the feminist movement in India or in South Asia. I would say that it would be a similar situation, because we still are caste blind when we're talking, when women's rights movement people talk about sexual violence, they are caste blind. And our Dalit man, when they are discussing issues of Dalit rights, they are gender blind. So with that framework, if we lead those processes as Dalit women activists and leaders, I think things will be in a better shape, and it will be in our control. And I think what we have to do is we have to not be controlled by anyone, whether it is Dalit man or feminist, so-called mainstream feminist, or because we have our own dignity and self-respect, and we have the knowledge, and we have the understanding, and the knowledge and understanding which we have, I don't think anyone else from other castes would have. And so that is a pride for us, and that is the experience which we have gained from generation to generation, where we have seen the suffering, and we have transformed the suffering into power, and we are trying to take it forward by questioning the age old practices, and entire issue of sexual violence. So the time has come as as to bring the sisterhood of Dalit feminism. I think this is what we want to do in South Asia, in caste affected country, in the diaspora also as well. And we have a representative from IDSN, our great friend Meena, and she would be also discussing about it. I think it's high time, and Meena also knows that how we at one time, when we raised the issue of caste, we just raised the issue of caste in 2001, but it was Dalit women's leadership. It was us who brought into the framework of intersectionality within the UN agenda, and I think that's very important. And that what builds up our own global recognition as well. And it takes us from our own country, it takes us to the South Asian context, and it takes us to the global context. And it's so important for us to recognize that we still have to work a lot on documentation, on cases which Sona was saying in Nepal. I think I was hearing for the first time, because it's not been brought up by the media or by other feminist organizations. And it's us Dalit sisters who have to bring up. We have to show solidarity to Moni Rani ji, who is struggling for her own rights and the rights of her women in Bangladesh. And I have visited Bangladesh as well. I've met her in Dhaka, and where she lives, I know her personal story as well. So I think the point is, how do we become stronger in South Asia? We start from there. And I think that's why this webinar is so important for us, is we are coming together as a strong community also, because we want to come up as allies. We have to take forward the processes which we have done in our own countries. So National Council of Women Leaders, yes, we started in India, but the possibility is we can have it as South Asian Women's Leaders Council. That's possible. So the point is, how do we enrich each other's experience and gain from each other's experience? How do we have cross boundary experiences, exposures? Because we all need to support each other, and this is the right time that we support each other. And this is the also the time when Dalit women's rights are being visibilized. We are now recognized. At one time, we were not recognized. We were not given that prominent positions within the movement as well. So I think this is the right time where we are seeing ourselves, and we are seeing our growth, and we are seeing our past and our present, and we also see our future. So if we put our energies together, if we put our strength together, our skills, our competencies, our different field of expertise, we can turn the world, turn around the world on our side. And I think that's what is the time for us, that now come up with all the anger and with all the passion and whatever we have gone through, and take it forward with strong force and with humility. And what you were saying, Thenmozhi, this is so important, that we also, through this, we will heal each other, and we have to heal ourselves with what the trauma and the pain which we have been carrying in our body, in our soul, which needs to be transformed. And with sharing of our own experiences also makes us stronger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjula. I'm sure I share the audiences. There are so many people who down their spine, because we could see that, you know, just before our eyes, suffering being turned into power with your beautiful words. Because ultimately we are here in anger, but we are also here because of love. Love for each other, love for each sister that is on this call, each family that has been hurt by this violence. Love is this ultimate healing balm. And that for us, what we want is a future where we can see our families be able to live their best lives beyond this violence. And it is clear that we are not able to achieve that within our own context, which is why we need a South Asian, you know, Dalit sisterhood committed to love, empathy, freedom, liberation, and possibility. So I just really am so grateful for hearing your great words. And Moni, Rani, I'd love to bring you in now and hear from your perspective in the Bangladeshi feminist context. How do you see Dalit feminists building hope and possibility? And what vision, you know, Bangladeshi Dalit women want to share in that regard? So Moni, Rani, to you. Manjula, do you want to translate for her? Because I'm not sure if she heard the question.
मोनी रानी जी वो कह रही हैं कि अब आगे कैसे बढ़ना है हमें जो हमारी ताकत है उसको आगे कैसे बढ़ाना है। हम सब अलग अलग देशों में हैं, हम सब दलित महिलाएं हैं, दलित बहनें हैं, तो ये जो हम एक दूसरे को किस तरह से सहयोग दे सकते हैं, किस तरह से हमारी आगे की रणनीति होनी चाहिए, उस पर आप अपनी बात रखिए, आपके अनुभव शेयर करिए, और आप आगे क्या देखना चाहती हैं इस वेबिनार के माध्यम से द्वारा। जी,
हम सब अलग अलग है, तो हम लोग को सबको एक संग रह के आज हम जैसे जून मीटिंग में हम शामिल भए हैं, तो इसी तरह मीटिंग करके हम लोग का जो अपना अपना देश का समस्या सबको बोलना है, बताना है जो हमारे देश में क्या है, आपका देश में क्या है, उनका देश में क्या है। तो सब देश का समस्या एक संग एक जगह रहकर तो हम लोग को समस्या का समाधान करना है। तो हम बांग्लादेश की तरफ से कहते हैं जे हम जब बांग्लादेश में रहते हैं तो बांग्लादेश का हर एक इंफॉर्मेशन तो आप लोग तक पहुंचना जरूरी है, आप लोग को बताना जरूरी है। तो इसी तरह हम काम कर रहे हैं। हम जो काम नहीं करेंगे तो घर पर जो बैठ के रहेंगे तो इंफॉर्मेशन तो कैसे पाएंगे, किस तरह पाएंगे, आपको कैसे बताएंगे। तो इसीलिए हम लोग को सबको एक होके काम करना है और आगे बढ़ना है। आगे जो हम ये चार, अभी तो हम यहाँ 4 बहना है, तो 4 बहना से हम लोग को 8 बहना करना है। तो सबको मिल के साउथ एशिया देश में कंट्री में जितना बहना है सबको हम लोग को एक संग रह के हम लोग को काम करना है। और हम जो घर पर बैठ जाएंगे तो हमारे जो दलित महिला है इनका तो और अत्याचार बढ़ेगा, इनका संग मेरे और बेसिक कर सब टीम में गांव है सिटी में, तो महिलाओं का जो अत्याचार है जो सबसे ज्यादा तो घर पे ही होता है, घर पर, परिवार में, तो समाज में, राष्ट्रों में। तो इनका साथ हम लोग को देना है इनका आगे बढ़ाना है, इनके लिए सोचना है कि हम चुपचाप रहेंगे तो ये बढ़ेगा और बस्ट होगा। तो इसके लिए मैं चाहती हूँ जो हमारे बांग्लादेश की तरफ से, आप इंडिया की तरफ से, सब देश की तरफ से हम लोग को आगे बढ़ना है और इनके लिए कुछ काम करना है। और चुपचाप रहने से तो नहीं होगा। चुपचाप रह कर जो हम सोचेंगे, जैसे हमारे सोना जी आज बोली से नेपाल किस तरह के लड़की लोग को रेप होता है, किस तरह लड़की लोग को अत्याचार होता है। तो ये सोना भी जो घर पर रहेगी, आज जो घर पर रहती तो इस तरह का उसका कान में कुछ भी सुनाई नहीं देता। उनका उनका इतना अच्छा से जो बोली से नेपाल के तरफ से वो बोलने नहीं सकती। तो इसी के लिए हम लोग को सबको एक होकर काम करना है। हम आगे बढ़ेंगे, आगे बढ़े हैं और भी आगे बढ़ना चाहिए। आवाज उठाना होगा, जो आवाज हम लोग का जानकारी रखना है। तो हम सोचते जो हम लोग को इसी तरह हम लोग काम करना है और करके हम लोग को आगे बढ़ना है। आवाज को छेड़ने से नहीं होगा। हम आवाज उठाएं
Thank you so
और
much for
अपना
sharing
तरफ से
your
सबसे
calls
महिला लोग
for
के लिए काम
unity and
करेंगे।
power building.
लोग का
Moni Rani ji,
इतना
it's very
प्रॉब्लम है, ये
clear that we
सॉल्व
need more
नहीं।
than. It's very clear we need more than just uh, 4 women or 8 women. We need millions of women around the world who are standing up as Dalit women claim our rights.
हाँ, दीदी आप सुन रहे हैं? हेलो,
Yes, hi Moni Rani.
हाँ आप सुन रहे हैं?
हाँ मोनी रानी जी जी।
हाँ, तो इसी तरह हम लोग को सब टाइम आगे बढ़ने के लिए हम लोग को तरीका सब टाइम सामने रखना है। ये तरीका हम लोग को खोज के निकालना है, किस तरह हम लोग काम करेंगे। तो जो आप सबका संग में जे मैं काम करने के लिए मेरा बहुत इच्छा है। जो मैं भी सोचती है जो आप लोग का हम लोग बांग्लादेश में जो हमारे दलितों के अंदर से, जैसे मंजुला दी आप जैसे बैरिस्टर हो, तो हम लोग बांग्लादेश की तरफ से इसी तरह हम लोग का दलितों के भीतर बहुत कमी है, बैरिस्टर नहीं है। तो इसी के लिए हम लोग लड़की लोग को पढ़ाई लिखाई, लड़का लोग को शिक्षा की तरफ से आगे बढ़ा रहे। जैसे एक दिन न एक दिन वो भी बैरिस्टर होने सके, जे अपना अपना दलितों के लिए जैसे जे इस तरह जे वहाँ पर जे सब टाइम हम लोग सोचते हैं हम लोग को विचार करने के लिए कोई नहीं रहता। तो उस टाइम में हम लोग का एक जन
Thank you for that additional gem of wisdom there, Moni Rani. I'd like to bring in, I'd like to bring in Sona. And Sona, again, the question that I was asking everybody is really about, how do you see the visionary and hopeful tactics of coming from Dalit feminists in Nepal? Because even in the face of all of this darkness, we know that there are just powerhouse leaders like you who are still dreaming of the world that comes after violence.
इस सवाल में सिस्टरहुड कैसे आगे बढ़ सकते हैं और इसमें मैं अपना राय देने से भी अभी मैं काम करते करते वक्त के अनुभव के आधार में मैं आज यहाँ तक पहुंची हूँ। आस्ते आस्ते इस तरह के प्रोग्राम में आ रही हूँ, इसलिए मैं अभी सीख रही हूँ। लेकिन मेरा काम के अनुभव के आधार में जैसे भी समस्याओं के कैसे समाधान कर सकते हैं, समाधान का रास्ता ढूंढने से पहले समस्या क्या है और क्यों ऐसा समस्या हो रहा है, ये तथ्य भी पता लगाना बहुत जरूरी है। सबसे पहले तो भाषा का ही समस्या है। मैं नेपाली हिंदी बोल लेती हूँ, लेकिन और भाषा तो बोलने में हमें समस्या है। ये सिर्फ मेरे लिए भर नहीं, अधिकांश दलित महिलाओं के लोगों के लिए भी ये समस्या है। जब हमारी भाषा के ही समस्या है तो अपना बात हम लोग कैसे रख सकते हैं? तो अपना समस्या हम कैसे कह सकते हैं, उसका समाधान कैसे ढूंढें हम? भाषा का समाधान पहले ही ढूंढना होगा हम लोगों का। दूसरी बात है, दलित महिला सिर्फ एक ही दर्जा का नहीं है। नेपाल में पहाड़ी मधेसी दलित है। भारत, बांग्लादेश, श्रीलंका लगायत और देश में भी और लोग हैं दलित में ही। सबको एक ही नजर से देखकर नहीं, एक समान, सबको एक नजर से ही देखकर और समान अवसर देने से नहीं होगा। अलग अलग जरूर अवसर और अलग अलग नजर से देखना पड़ेगा। उनकी भाषा, क्षेत्र और क्षमताओं के आधार पे भी उनके लिए काम करना बहुत जरूरी है। हमें तो ये नहीं मालूम है कि इक्वालिटी के लिए आपने क्या करना है, लेकिन इसके बारे में हमें जानने की मैं इसके बारे में बहुत जानना चाहती हूँ। और नेपाल में कोविड के टाइम में भी कितना दलित का बलात्कार और हत्या हुआ है। इस वक्त आप सब कैसे काम को आगे बढ़ाए हैं, ये हमें तो मालूम नहीं है, लेकिन इसके बारे में भी यदि मालूम होता तो बहुत अच्छा होता। और सिस्टरहुड के बारे में बोलने से अच्छा मैं इस विषय में जानकारी लेना चाहता हूँ कि ये सिस्टरहुड क्षेत्रीय स्तर पर है या नहीं और कैसे काम कर रहा है कहकर। तीसरी बात का क्या है कि नेपाल में ठीक ठाक, और ये सवाल में बोलने वाले हैं ही नहीं कहकर नहीं है, लेकिन इस सवाल में ही कलम चलाने वाले, बोलने वाले बहुत कम हैं। अक्सर मैं इस सवाल में लिखा हुआ आर्टिकल, जर्नल पढ़ती हूँ और वीडियो वेबिनार में भी सवाल, उसमें से दलित महिला का आवाज पे कलम चलाने वाला, बोलने वाला में से मैं ज्यादातर सरिता परियार का आर्टिकल में ज्यादा पढ़ी हूँ। और दूसरी बात महिलावादी का बात जब आता है तो इसमें क्या है कि उत्पीड़न, जब से उत्पीड़न शुरू हुआ उसी वक्त से ही प्रतिकार शुरू हुआ है। और ये प्रतिकार हर एक घर में और ज्यादातर महिला लोग इस उत्पीड़न को प्रतिकार किए हैं। लेकिन वो प्रतिकार तो है, अक्सर खास करके दलित महिलाओं का प्रतिकार को संगठित नहीं किया गया महिलावादी में, इसलिए भी दलित महिला का प्रतिकार जो बाहर नहीं आ पाया। और जैसे उदाहरण के लिए कहेंगे तो मेरे घर में मेरी माँ ने प्रतिकार की, स्त्री सत्ता, पुरुष सत्ता तो है ही है। यदि मेरी माँ आगे नहीं बढ़ती और मुझे पढ़ाना है कहकर नहीं आगे आती तो शायद आज मैं यहाँ तक नहीं पहुँच पाती। आज ये फोरम भी हमें नहीं मिलता और यहाँ बोलने का भी अवसर नहीं मिलता। लेकिन मेरी माँ ने उतना ज्यादा प्रतिकार की खुद अपने घर में ही, लेकिन वो आवाज को संगठित नहीं किया गया, इसलिए मेरी माँ ने महिलावादी भी नहीं बन पाई है। उसके बाद में और क्या है कि तो ग्लोबल वाइज में मीटू अभियान आया और उस मीटू अभियान में ब्लैक वुमेन का बात दबाया गया, उनका बात आगे नहीं आ पाया। बस ऐसे ही है, नेपाल में भी महिलावादी है, लेकिन दलित महिलावादी लोग का संख्या बहुत कम है और वो लोग को आगे नहीं लाया जाता है, वो लोग अवसर नहीं पाते। यदि हम लोग सिस्टरहुड को क्षेत्रीय स्तर तक बढ़ाना है, महिलावादी का आगे लाना है, तो हम लोग इसको हम सबको तालीम देना जरूरी है, लगातार मेंटरशिप की जरूरी है, लगातार हम लोग का प्लेटफॉर्म का जरूरी है। और अवसर, ऐसे ही अवसर में ही यदि हम लोग लगातार भाग लेने को पाए तो शायद हमें लगता है कि मैं भी आप जैसी जगह पे भी पहुंच सकती हूँ। इसलिए मैं कहती हूँ कि अवसर देना बहुत जरूरी है, सबको क्षमता देखकर और आगे बढ़ाना जरूरी है, तो शायद हमें लगता है कि सिस्टर भी आगे बढ़ सकता है। और अंत में हमें इनवाइट किए हैं, आपने जो मौका दिए हैं इसके लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आप सभी को।
Sona, we have to offer you a thanks for joining us, because you are such a powerhouse, and really the possibilities of some of the questions you raised are exactly what we need to look at in terms of building hope. There is a deep promise of what comes from a global sisterhood of Dalit feminists, but it's clear from your remarks we need to have some strategic investments. The first being language justice. Even as you saw on this call, the barriers of language cannot be the barriers of us building power. And it is so critical that we need to be able to find connections and support, greater interpretation across all of the languages that we come from. Because again, when you're thinking about the South Asian context, we are a context that's one of the most language diverse regions in the world. I think there's at least, 300 to 400 languages in our region, and Dalit peoples are separated from each other by the questions of literacy and language. So whenever we are looking at trying to build a trans-regional process towards South Asian sisterhood that could provide training and capacity building and what you laid out, we need to have investments that also look at language justice because of how crucial that is. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward. And that also, I think that call for training, because it's very clear in each of our contexts, every country has innovated solutions in what's possible in that region. So this isn't about someone from far away coming in and saying, this is what it takes to be a good leader. We already know what it means to lead in our context. And now it's about sharing the best of the tactics we have in order to be able for us to move as a regional body. Because whether it's, the experience of what it means to tackle impunity, or the systems thinking that we heard from Moni, Rani, or the courage and the ability to hold accountability in family structures and organizational structures, there's so much knowledge that's untapped in Dalit women's movements that we need to harness for ourselves to really make this dream of a global Dalit women sisterhood a reality. And I heard so many possible seeds from your beautiful words, Sona, and just really want to thank you for that. And it really was inspiring to hear you all in this context. I also want to just emphasize for everyone who's listening is that, it's important that we recognize that Dalit women have not been in a vacuum. We are not just screaming our outrage into the sky and no one is listening. We have actually had international stakeholders flank our work for many years. And the International Dalit Solidarity Network has been an incredible incubator that has helped build pipelines for Dalit women stakeholders from around the world to do advocacy in many intergovernmental institutions, whether it is at the UN or the EU or at The Hague. So many of the ways that I was able to meet other Dalit women leaders was through the incredible leadership of IDSN and Meena Varna's work, who I'd love to bring in, who was going to respond to some of the comments before we go into Q&A. I just want to just recognize, Meena is a very humble person and doesn't often speak about her role in this work and the role of IDSN. But you need people to flank you when you're up against violent system of caste, and Meena and IDSN has been every step of the way with Dalit feminists from all around the context. And so Meena, I would love for you to take the next 5 minutes to respond to some of the calls to action and calls for hope and grief that was shared by our participants. So Meena.
Moni, thank you so much. I feel humbled and awed and inspired by the incredibly powerful conversations. I'd like to say hello to Moni, Rani, who I haven't seen for such a long time, Manjula, who I see regularly, and Sona. I'm so delighted to meet you, but also I see in the participants list, we have Sarita from Samata Foundation, and this morning I was with Poonam from Samata Foundation. So 3 more Dalit women that are making a real difference in the work that they do. And I think that is what IDSN especially wants to create space for. I think that is the most important thing. The most powerful voices we have in this room today are from the women we have heard from today. And I am just reflecting on some of those because, you know, we know caste-based sexual violence, well, it's a very ancient crime. But as everyone has heard today from these esteemed panelists, you know, sadly highlighting that caste-based sexual violence remains a very modern atrocity. And I think it's really important that, you know, we every time I come across people who want to be deny caste, it's like, oh, that was an ancient thing. Well, it's not. It's a here and now. And in fact, I was listening to someone in the Black Lives Matter movement who himself also said, you know, caste and race are our history, but unfortunately, it's also our present. And I think it's really important we remember that it is here and now. And the common thread that I think I heard from until we got to the hope part is that complete lack of political, societal, or judicial will to address, especially the issues against Dalit women. And I think one of the attendees again put in the chat box about the deafening silence that marks such atrocities. Why? What more do we need to do to ensure Dalit women's rights are human rights? It's just simply wrong that we are still having these conversations, that it makes such a difference. Actually, this, as we talked about, the solidarity in that global movement, I think it's really important that now, as Moni Rani said, we need to multiply and multiply and multiply and multiply. So for every day we square it again, 4 by 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. And we need to take over the world with this conversation. We need this to become a global discourse, because there is no rule of law. There is a fantastic constitution, especially in India. And as Thenmozhi said, that constitution has elements which have been copied across South Asia. And I think it's really important that we know that that constitution is meant to protect and enshrine the rights of all of its citizens. But why doesn't it? It doesn't because there is no political or judicial will to do so. And you know, any crime that is committed with impunity. And every time it's a Dalit woman, it is committed with even more. These cases are never, ever going to come to court unless we educate, agitate, organize, as someone has just put into the chat box. And I think the reason why this solidarity is so important is you've got to remember caste travels. And I think Ambedkar himself said back in 1916 that at the moment, caste is a very Indian problem, but where Hindus migrate, that will become a global problem. And we see that as a global problem. The UK, where I'm based, the US, where Thenmozhi is based, we are now caste-affected countries. And the reason we are caste-affected countries is because of the diaspora bringing those caste mindsets with them and bringing those caste behaviors with them and bringing that discriminatory behavior and the right to do so. They feel that they have the right to discriminate. Why? And that's why we need to have the global solidarity, but also global change. So in the UK and more recently in the US, we've been campaigning for that legislation. We've been campaigning for legislation to protect the rights of Dalits, but to protect against caste discrimination. And the reason why this is so important is because most of the time in the UK and the US, there is a rule of law. So where there is a rule of law, you might not change the casteist mindset, but you will change casteist behavior. And casteist behavior will have a consequence. And if it has a legal consequence, you have to change it. And then over time, maybe the casteist mindset will change, because over time, at least the racist and sexist mindset has lessened. It hasn't disappeared, but it has lessened. And I think that's why it's important. And it's also why global, solidarity is so important with what IDSN has been doing. We are bringing this to the international attention of the United Nations, of the EU, to our own Western governments. And as Manjula has said, and Moni Rani, we have worked on this at the IDSN for 20 years, but we have fine-tuned it now. We are talking about multiple intersectional forms of discrimination against Dalit women whenever we have those openings. We had an opening recently with a new EU ambassador, special rapporteur, sorry, on human rights. And we, as a consequence, spoke to the EU ambassador in Nepal, the EU human rights lead in India, and our work at the UN. I think Maria has put something in the chat box about how that will, again, you know, how you can use that. I mean, words are words, and that's where I come up against some of the work that IDSN does. Submissions, 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 but what the hell does that mean? It means that it actually brings these issues to the attention of some of the highest level officials, but we need action. So how do we get action? And I think, again, Moni, Rani was saying about the multiple voices, but it's also about collective voices. Government only listens when there is a collective action. And it's not just government, it's a multi-pronged attack. A lot of the work that IDSN is doing is now with international business. We talked about cases. There is a specific case in Tamil Nadu of a young Dalit girl who was raped and murdered in a factory in Tamil Nadu. That factory supplying some of the biggest global brands. They cannot fulfill their labor rights obligations unless they look at the bottom of their supply chains and look at the most vulnerable and the most invisible workers. These crimes cannot keep happening with such impunity, and businesses need to know they can't just tick a box. They need to make a difference. And business needs to talk to government because they have money and they have power. But then we can have our collective voice that will ensure the intergenerational movement for global change. Sisterhood, we've talked about it for the last hour and a half, you know, and that is, sisterhood is also solidarity. I am so honored to be with so many of you here today. I'm so honored to have been invited, Thenmozhi and Manjula. I know you're probably behind that, you know, but we need to stand by each other. And I think the thing about solidarity is it's not about solidarity to a country. It's not solidarity to a race. It's really solidarity to humanity. And that's what we need to take forward. We need to know that caste has no boundaries, but then neither do we. We will have no boundaries when it comes to dismantling this structure of caste and discrimination. And we will ensure that Dalit women have the power and the voice to speak out, and we will open spaces and we will keep hearing their voices and we will keep shouting and we will be behind you every single step of the way. So Jai Bhim, everybody, thank you so much for inviting me. Please, please, please let us follow this up. I can see so many comments in the chat box. So, you know, we already have a movement of at least 100 here. So let's multiply the 100, not 4.
That's right. And I think that it's a very powerful thing to know that our movements are limitless and innovative in the face of this violence. And I wanted to pick up on one thing, Meena, that you mentioned, which is that, you know, it is true that not only are we seeing transnational corporations contribute to caste-based sexual violence, but we're also seeing caste-based sexual violence happen outside of the South Asian region as dominant caste people take their disgusting practices globally. And, you know, I wanted to, you know, the corollary of the other case that you mentioned in terms of the company that led to the murder of that young Tamil worker is that there's actually Dalit women that are being sexually trafficked by dominant caste men to work in businesses in places like the United States, Australia, and the UK. And a very famous case was one called the Lucky Bali Reddy case, which was actually the first time that any American institution actually got confronted with the issue of caste, because this landlord from Andhra Pradesh trafficked over 300 workers, all of whom were young girls, as young as 11 and 10. And the grooming of those girls happened in schools in Andhra Pradesh, where he would be felicitated as a guest of honor. He would find the girls, the children that he wanted, sexually molest them in India, and then bring them on fake visas to work in his thing. And because of global solidarity and sisterhood, he was arrested and convicted. in a massive way, in ways that we've not seen impunity allow for in our context. So the possibility of how we might create transnational bonds, South Asian regional solidarities, and also capacity build with each other is the way forward, is the engine of hope. And so I just want to thank everyone who was our audience today, and the bravery of all of our speakers. I know I speak on behalf of everyone that witnessed this call. There was no person that wasn't moved from in their hearts and in their bodies and their spirits from the truth that was spoken by Manjula and Sona and Moni, Rani, and so many of the other survivors who are here on the chat together. We are not here to play. We are not here to have another webinar that talks about violence from 10 years from now. We are here to basically take back the systems and bring forth a vision of hope and freedom for all of our peoples. And so I just want to thank everybody for all of the hard work. We are actually running out of time for the and so what we'd like you to do is, if possible, we'll be having all of the social media handles of the orgs that are involved here. If you have questions, please reach out to us on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook, or you could email our Eventbrite. We do not intend this to be the last program. We intend this to be the opening of an even more powerful regional conversation. As you will see, Dalit women will never take no for an answer, and we are here to get our freedom by any means necessary. So again, we are so grateful for you joining us today and look forward to seeing you in our event as we build power to end caste-based sexual violence once and for all. So Jay Beam and Jay Savitri, again, a pleasure and an honor to be with you all, and good night and good morning wherever you may be watching this. See you. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
For panelists, do you guys want to stay on?